Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. This is the Endless Song Podcast with Will and Emily. Yeah, well, it's one thing to actually talk and hear yourself in the headphones, but hearing it on the delay makes you really, really cognizant of what you sound like. But hearing it on the delay is even worse because you're like, oh no, I just sounded like that and I can't take it back. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about vocabulary. We talked about this before, but now it's time to really set this level. Like the mics, vocabulary levels need to be set.
Yeah, and get the understanding that vocabulary can be very different for everyone. And I think that's what is really important about these two words that we're going to talk about.
Oh, and I think too, vocabulary has become a thing that's become very triggering for people.
Oh, yeah.
Because people hold on to their definition of something, their verbiage, and hearing someone refer to something in a different way almost sets them off.
Yeah, and I know it, especially with one of these words, one of them is a trigger for you where it's not for me.
Yeah, well, I think
and that's interesting.
I think there's lots of things that are triggers for lots of people, and it's almost as important to understand why people trigger to words and phrases and even actions, because it tells you a bit about them too.
Yeah, well, and that's why I think it's really important that if you're not sure what someone means when they use a certain word, ask them.
Yeah.
And just really, very simply, just say, what do you mean by that word? What do you mean by that? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the word awakening.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's the whole point of this. So
yeah. So what is your definition of awakening or being awake?
Well, I think the big thing about the word awakening is that, in my case, it's a spiritual, and there's another word,
right,
sort of bent, because I'm becoming aware of things that I thought about before, but I didn't take time to really look into. Or
like what?
Well, I think the concept of things that usually religion tends to cover. What is life? Where do we come from? What does this all mean? Why are we here? Mm-hmm. What happens when we die? Where do we go? If we're these fundamentally complex beings, and there's a debate in there about just how complex we are, whether we are a whole and complete being or whether we exist in layers. Mm-hmm. That's the difficult part of even talking about the word awakening in that sense, is that I'm awakening to spiritual ideas and themes that I didn't necessarily take seriously, not in a mocking way, but just as not a part of something that I considered before. I mean, I obviously thought about them, looking at the interconnectedness of all things and the way I look at situations, look at people, That's what I'm awakening to. And I think that's the important thing. I think, to me, awakening can mean lots of things because you can have lots of different kinds of awakenings. And we talked a lot about this after the fair, that there seemed to be this intersectionality between the spiritual nature of things that were going on at the fair, but also this connectedness to like lots of LGBTQ plus spaces. There seemed to be this overlap in there. And, in a way that was sort of an awakening too. I don't know why I never put two and two together, but the more I think about it, it's almost like another awakening. The idea of the intersectionality of certain things and how things are connected in ways we don't think about on a regular basis because we're not taking the time to focus on those things. Mm-hmm. And I think if we really want to break it down, awakening to me is opening a focus to something that's either been around and you've known about, but you haven't had anything to do with, or to something you've never seen before and it's new and you want to know more about it. I think that's what that means to me. And it gives it a very broad focus. But in a lot of ways, I think there's a lot of things that we deal with as human beings on a daily basis that are broader than we treat them. And that's part of the problem. So in a way, that's another way that I feel like I'm awakening, is to really thinking about the broadness and interconnectedness of everything and how much that matters to what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, awakening, your definition of it right now compared to next year, compared to 10 years down the road, I think it evolves. That's why it's a challenging word, because one, it's different for everyone, but that it also changes for yourself. And that can change from month to month, especially if you are going through something where you are learning a lot of lessons and things just open up to you where they didn't make sense. Something didn't make sense before, but now it makes sense. And so your view, your worldview opens up more, and you are awake to new ideas or new concepts and things like that also.
Yes. Well, and I think you threw another great word in there that is a loaded word that people should talk about more, and that's the idea of evolution, of evolving. It's such a tainted word now. The intersection of religion and science have had this battle over that word, that it's made it mean one specific thing. But really the idea, the concept of evolution is important, whether you believe in the scientific concept of it or not, is that things that don't evolve stagnate. It's hard to think of something that has been successful and been completely stagnant.
Right.
Someone could say, well, what about sharks? Sharks have been the same for millions of years, but they haven't stagnated. Some have developed other traits. Evolutions don't have to be a huge world change. They can be small. But the most important thing is that the intent of it is to drive something to a better place, a more survivable place. And I think you're right. I think if you stop evolving, it means you've stopped learning. It means you've stopped questioning. It means you've stopped thinking. And you've stopped trying to be better. All of which are things that have been really important. So I think that's a great example of the vocabulary problem.
In a nutshell, right? Yeah. I mean, just how it goes off onto, I wouldn't call them tangents, but they are like these multiple different roads. Our human language is so diverse. I mean, we have words that mean that the same word that can mean multiple meanings.
Yeah.
And so
and we have multiple words that mean one meaning.
Right.
It's both sides.
Yeah.
And that's it. I think the worst part of it is when words and ideas come to carry baggage. We've talked about this before. The most obvious case, the most egregious case that I can think of is the swastika, a Hindu symbol that is a symbol of protection. It has a positive meaning to it, but yet that symbol was greatly corrupted and a whole heap of baggage was placed on it.
Right.
To the point now that it's offensive to large swaths of people just to see one.
Mm-hmm.
And yet its positive connotation goes way back, way farther than anything that the Nazis could have done to it. But still, it persists. It's tainted. And I don't know if, when something gets to that point where it's carrying that much baggage, I don't know if it can ever come back. It's almost like it's just better to let it go.
Yeah, sometimes I wish that we could kind of scrape some words, or come up with new words, or I don't know, like these two words, awakening and spiritual. They're really hard because you want to connect with people through language to get on that same page, but just to get to that point, you have to understand what someone else even means when they're saying these things. So back to awakening. So for me, awakening is when a person understands that this human life is not a one and done, that we are energetic beings that existed before we came here as humans and that will continue after our bodies stop functioning, right? That we are eternal beings. And so just saying that's a lot, right? If you really take that into the definition of what awakening is to me, that's a whole big picture. And that's why I really don't even like the word awakening.
That's understandable.
Because, well, let me talk to you for 20 minutes about what my whole take on life is. But that also doesn't mean that when you are awake, that you have all of the answers. And I think that's so important, because I think that when people have awakenings, they actually get a surplus of questions, some of which may never be answered. And that becomes the journey. So I think for me, awakening is really taking your first step onto the journey of understanding what we are, or what you believe we are. And in my case, that's understanding that we are energetic, eternal beings.
And I think, more importantly, just to sort of tie up what we're talking about here, the idea of awakenings as being a one and done is discussing it in bad faith. Obviously, if you're paying attention, if you're thinking, if you're searching, if you're asking the questions, if you're doing the work, you're likely to have multiple awakenings.
Right.
In different aspects, in different ways, ones that come out of other awakenings. And I think just looking at where both of us are coming from on this vocabulary shows the evolution of both of our processes. I'm still in the beginning phase of my process. My look at what an awakening is simplistic compared to yours, because you've had more time to think and soak in these sort of ideas, that you are a little deeper into the
I wasn't 10 years old saying we are all energetic beings vibrating at a high frequency, or I wasn't doing that.
No,
at that age.
But you've had that time, so your concept of awakening is deeper. You're further along the path, and I think that just goes to prove that point, that awakenings they can happen in multiple ways and at multiple times and for multiple reasons. And they can lead you to multiple different places. But essentially, you're always working towards getting to the same place. It's almost like the awakening is a door. And it opens, and there's something new.
And then you start the journey.
But then there's always going to be more doors you're going to run into.
Sure.
And it's your choice to step through that door and experience the something new. But of course, that's also a process of evolution. That's evolving. You're asking questions, you're moving forward, you're taking steps, you're making changes, you're enlightening yourself.
Yeah.
Another problematic word, I'm sure, for many.
Right.
Right? The idea of enlightenment or being enlightened. But I think in a lot of ways, that is where the baggage is. Words mean what they mean, and then humans go and heap all of this stuff onto them that never quite rolls off. Or like enlightenment comes with a whole bunch of things tacked on that are not really the main intention of the word. I think there needs to be that go back, like you were talking about. People need to look at something for what it is and not carry the baggage. Leave the baggage off to the side.
Yeah, but we're human beings,
sure.
And that's really hard to do.
But I think that
right?
I think in a lot of ways that's a big part of enlightenment, is letting go of that baggage and seeing things for what they are and not existing underneath that pile of everything else that's been heaped onto it by other people.
Yeah, well, and that, talk about something that's challenging, because we are emotional beings.
Sure.
So perspective is really hard if you're in the thick of it, and it's hard to step back from those emotions and look at things from an outside perspective. That's a beautiful thing when you're able to do it, or if you're able to do it. I've been practicing that for years, but I would also consider myself a very reactionary person, because I can be a very emotional person. To have perspective is a gift when it happens, but even practicing it for so long, it doesn't always happen.
And I feel like you're leaning into that second word.
Yeah. Second
spirituality.
Word. Spiritual, yeah.
Spiritual. I mean, you're right. That word for me carries baggage, and over the last couple of months I've had to learn to deal with that baggage, and I think in a lot of ways that's been a big important part of my awakening journey. For my entire life, the notion of spirituality fell into two camps. There was the crystals and witches and woo group that talked about spirituality as their thing. That was their deal. They were spiritual
And
people.
did that have a negative connotation with it growing up?
No,
Oh, okay,
not
good.
at all. I think it just fell into that camp because when you think about spirituality, it's the spirituality section at the bookstore or at the library where books about crystals and ghosts
Right,
and
okay, I see what you're
witchcraft
saying.
and all those things fit. So that's baggage in a sense. And I studied all that stuff when I was younger. So, I mean, when people would say things like spiritual, the first question in my head is, are you talking spiritualism or are you talking religion? And religion is the more problematic aspect of spiritual for me, because religion has done a really great job of co-opting that word as being a part of its vocabulary.
Yeah.
Almost as if you can't use that word unless it is in a religious context. That spiritualness comes from religion. And we could probably do 10 episodes on my problem with religion, and we won't talk about that here, but just to put a context on where that bit of baggage comes from, it's still hard. When we were classifying the podcast, I put spirituality as the second level of descriptor in front of education and self-awareness or self-help, because that word was triggering in that sense. I didn't want people to confuse it with suddenly Will found religion. I didn't find religion. I found something more, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about in the future. That's, you're absolutely right. That's a word to me that is loaded, and it's loaded twice over. And what I've come to find is that reality for the word spiritual is somewhere in the middle, as a lot of things are. And it takes some grace.
And there's another
word. To let that word mean what it actually means.
So what does it mean to you?
So spirituality means anything related to the higher self. You know, what people might call your soul, or in my case, the higher being that I come from, and all dealing with that. Everything that's not of the body me, but of the higher me, which bleeds into both of the avenues I was talking about earlier, but it's not, and it shouldn't be owned. And I think that's where the problem comes, is the feeling of ownership. And it shouldn't be owned. It's a concept.
And that's interesting that you say that, because that's where you came from as someone who grew up going to church, and the vocabulary that you learned it through, that was the lens. For me, I don't see religion as owning the word spiritual, but I grew up through the lens. We never went to church. We never talked about God. That wasn't a thing in my life. And so the word spiritual is more about, one, it's non-religious based, has nothing to do with religion. And it's big. I mean, it's like my awakening has a big definition. Same thing with spirituality. That is really, for me, when a person understands that everything around us is energy, and which is it's scientific sounding at the same time. But I think as we progress as a human species, science is going to really bleed into spirituality, and maybe they'll come up with a new word. But I think the more studies that happen with energy and the way atoms work, they vibrate. Everything vibrates because everything contains atoms, right? For me, spirituality is because of that vibration and the different frequencies at which everything vibrates, that creates what I referred to as different realms or different dimensions, right? And there's that overlap of words again with the spirituality and the scientific. And so for me, I'm like an animist, which I believe that everything has consciousness, because if everything contains atoms and everything is vibrating at a frequency, I look at everything as being conscious, which in itself, that's a whole nother discussion as well. And going back into the science realm and the scientists who are, learning about trees who communicate with one another, and how mycelial networks communicate with entire forests. And, consciousness is being redefined, which is really interesting too. So anyways, for me, spiritualness is basically that we are all connected through time and space, no matter what frequency you are vibrating at or anything else is vibrating at. We are all connected in this huge, amazing, ever-expanding web of consciousness. So, and that's a lot to kind of wrap your head around.
But I think it's a big part of the discussion. As we move forward, as people move forward on their journeys, it's that idea that, you need to come back and look at these things with a grain of salt and really think them through to understand what they mean to you.
Exactly.
As well as to others.
That's the key.
So that we always keep the conversation moving forward.
Love that.
You've been listening to the Endless Song Podcast with Will and Emily. Today's music, Everything Feels New and Alternative Ways by Evgeny Bardyuzha. Stay safe out there, everyone. And remember, intentions matter. So be thoughtful, be kind, and be better every day. And we'll see you out there on the trails. So this is just the test to try it out. I'm talking a little bit. Now Emily's going to talk a little bit so I can hear what she sounds like.
So I'm talking a little bit, and I just want to say you were so cute with those headphones on because you look like a little avatar
Oh.
that in a video game.
Well, that's good. That's good. Okay.